All right, I'm here with lurppis, the holder of the highest Blast Pro card number, if I'm not mistaken.
Naturally, of course.
So how are you finding the format?
Well, I said previously that I like the format. I don't necessarily like the fact that a lot of the time we play one match at a time. Admittedly, after seeing this entire tournament, because of the fact that it was the six best teams in the world, it probably would be better to have only 2 games at once, because 2 games is easier to keep track of at the same time. But meanwhile, if it's a bigger tournament, something like IEM Oakland, where it's like 12 teams or more, then I think it's justifiable to have 3 games on at once.
Where do you stand on the balance of a tournament being geared towards entertaining or coming up with a winner that is justifiably the best team at the tournament?
Well, there's room for both, right? The whole point is you have to differentiate. Some tournament organizers go for the title of just being the fairest tournament, having the ultimate format for deciding who the best team is. So events like Epicenter cater to that crowd, and then there's plenty of room for other tournaments. So what I'm mostly surprised is why smaller tournaments, say the Dreamhack Opens of the world, haven't actually gone for differing formats to differentiate themselves.
Speaking of format, I'm going to bring up a mutual passion of ours, which is charges only. With Blast being a brand new tournament, well, they're white labeling it from PGL, but being a new tournament on the circuit, do you think they would have the room to sort of experiment with not necessarily the max rounds 30 and other type of, so I don't know if there's any other type of format than charges only or max rounds 30, but do you think a tournament can actually take the risk and deviate from what we know to be Counter-Strike today?
The funny thing is, I actually spoke to Frederick, the manager of Astralis, who obviously also works for Refresh, and Messioso, who works for Refresh now, used to work for ESL, and they actually said they actually thought about charges only. But the thing is, you don't want to do that for
this tournament?
Not for this tournament, just more in broader terms. But the problem is, you don't want to do that for a 250k tournament with 6 of the world's best teams. That's the kind of thing you want to do for maybe a 4-team, smaller tournament, try it out, see how it works, because you don't really know how the teams are going to feel about it going into it. It's one of those things that you sort of, we haven't seen a single tournament played in that in more than 15 years, so you sort of have to give it a chance and then just see whether it works or not. You can't really know in advance.
So what do you think about a tournament having a single best of 3 and all the rest of the matches, excluding the show match, being best of 1, a good barometer of where these teams stand, as opposed to all the other tournaments that use much more, well, you could say sophisticated formats to determine who's sustainably the better?
Well, see, the only thing about best of ones is that the veto goes differently. That's the only thing that really changes at the end of the day. I never really understood the huge criticism that best of 1 format gets in general, because at the end of the day, when you play a best of 3, very often both of those teams are going to be favored on their own map pick if they're of an equal level, and at that point, a lot of the time it comes down to the 3rd map anyway. So it's just a case of there's more pressure on you in the one map that you actually play, and you just have to be ready to go from the get-go. You can't really afford to have a slow start. So I think it just puts more pressure on you. It's a bit like American football in that sense, where every single match matters when you play best of 1. Unlike, say, the regular season of the NHL, the NBA, you have 82 games. So, it just doesn't matter what happens in a single game, only in a broader sample. So that's something that I think best of one helps with.
So you're going back to the map vetoes a bit. What's your opinion about map vetoes being declared well in advance? So basically, we knew the map vetoes for this tournament before IEM Oakland, so it gave teams a bit. You think that between all those long-haul flights, the teams had a bit more time to prepare and think long-term about strategy?
No, certainly, especially because teams have analysts these days. They have other people that are getting paid to just look at demos, do that kind of preparation outside of the game. So it certainly helped. It's also one of those things, admittedly, where you just have to try it and see how it plays out because you don't really know. One thing that I'm actually curious about that I'm going to have to ask the Astralis guys later tonight is I think there's at least three matches when I looked at the veto that would have gone differently if they knew that they had Dennis, where they wouldn't have gone this way if they knew that they weren't playing with device. Obviously, wound up working in their favor, and I think the biggest part about that is the fact that they're only playing 2 maps in the entire group stage, which allowed them to actually focus on 2 maps properly in the limited time that they had for practice. On broader terms, or a more general level, I'm not really sure. I'd have to speak to the teams more first to sort of get their idea of how they felt about it. But I do like that you switch it up sometimes. I don't think it's necessarily in any way better to always just have the veto 5 minutes before the game. I think it's interesting to mix it up and just see how it works out. I think it definitely has advantages as well as some disadvantages, such as form changing on maps between tournaments.
So other than that, what do you think about Cash not being played at all this tournament? Well, we'll see in the best of 3, but in the best of 1s, we didn't see Cash once.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be played in the best of 3. But I think it's just a pretty bad map, frankly. That's the whole thing. I think Kabul is a terrible map. That should be out of the pool. And I think Cache is number 2 right behind it. It's just not a very good map. It's not a very tactical map. There's not a lot of things you can do on that. And it's frankly just almost impossible, it seems, to be consistently very good on that map. Which means it winds up being one of those maps where often it's actually played out more as a result. Because it's one of those maps where you often don't blow someone out. You sort of stay in the game until the end. And that sort of makes it easier for you. It feels like there's less pressure in group stage matches as a result. But I think it's a fairly bad map. I'm in the same boat with MSL on that one.
So you said 2 maps are downright terrible from the 7 map pool. So would you prefer that we only had 5 maps, or?
I mean, we'll never go back to that because the fans would never accept having 5 maps again. I think the level of play would be higher if we had only 5 maps. What I would do is I would just do rotation that changes after every major, so you'd have 5 maps in the active pool, and then after the major you kick 2 of them out, you bring 2 more in, and then you do that again and again and again. So you constantly keep changing the maps, but you still let the teams focus on a smaller pool, which is going to increase the level of play because teams are going to be better across the whole board.
So with Dust 2 potentially coming back for the next major, which map would you prefer, and which map do you think it will replace?
I wish that Kabul went out. I'm pretty sure Mirage will go out, which is a shame because I think Mirage might actually be, well, Overpass and Train are my personal favorites, but I think Mirage is right up there in terms of the quality of the map, how much teams like to play it, how many different ways you can play it. But that is the last map that hasn't had a facelift. You know, it's the only map remaining with the sort of the old graphics, old textures. So I think, unfortunately, that's probably, with the way Valve's been doing it so far, that's the logical choice for going out for a bit of a facelift next.
Okay, so there's a bit of a different topic. The Hungarian government approved a 7.5 million, sort of like a bursary, to improve Hungarian esports via tournament organization and conferences. So obviously Finland in 1.6 used to be, I think, a bit better than it is in CSGO. You could say that.
Safe to say?
Yeah. So if you had that kind of money, how would you allocate the resources to make Finnish CS great again?
Well, I mean, I think it has to be more of a broader esports question, I think, to be fair. But actually, interestingly enough, the Finnish government is giving, admittedly, a much smaller amount of money. It's in the low 6 figures to basically the Finnish Esports Federation is what it's called. And I've been a huge critic of them since the get-go. I think they've basically been burning money, just doing stupid things with it. I don't think they've done just about anything to help Finnish esports. And considering my view on taxes and the government in general, I think that's a huge waste. I don't think the government should be giving that federation any money at all. Now, as a result, though, I have written a couple of times about things they should be doing versus what they should not be doing, because I actually have some kind of framework to think about this question. So I think the kind of things that any government-funded agency needs to do is things that otherwise wouldn't get done. So as a result, what you don't do is you don't host tournaments, because that's going to happen. Maybe you encourage someone who's already doing that to host that. So for example, what you would do is when big tournaments look for places to host events, you give them a grant, you give them like a free, cheaper stadium or a free stadium, whatever it takes, and you encourage tournaments to come there. That's the kind of thing you do.
Because I asked Janko roughly the same question, and he said that if a Dreamhack or an ESL were to host an event in Budapest, that would significantly boost the interest in professional, computer gaming. What else do you think can be done to bolster the currently existing scene? So, for example, you have the Finnish scene, and you have obviously Alu, who is still at the top tier of professional CS:GO. But what would you do to motivate other teams to get their stuff together and keep striving for more?
Well, I think it goes back to the thing of what is not being done otherwise. So I think what you need to do is you need to support the grassroots level of Counter-Strike or any other esport. So as a result, what you do is you actually support the kind of tournaments where the professionals don't go, but the tomorrow's professionals are going to go. So you keep building that infrastructure, because that infrastructure doesn't make sense financially. It's not going to be done by any of the bigger tournament organizers. But if you keep getting more and more kids to play today, in 3 years, they're going to be competitive. And I believe, didn't the Hungarian team actually get a decent win this week?
Yeah, they drew with Virtus Pro.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
that's big. I mean,
congrats to GameAgents from here.
That was impressive. I mean, admittedly, I think they were up 14-5 and then wound up only tying. But I mean, that's still a pretty good result.
All right, thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem.